Well, paradoxically, my point is that actually it's the artists and thinkers who have to carpe diem much harder than the practical, adrenaline-driven people. The artists and thinkers have to actually care about the present moment much more than the physical people. Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert D. Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. In this rather brief video, I want to talk about thinking and the tragedy of thinking and the temporal aspect of thinking. That would be actually the key idea I want to discuss here. So, how do we perform thinking? How do we think? Well, you might say, firstly, we need to imagine the thing we want to think about, and then sort of like sniff around, right? Try to scout around, like what is it connected to, how does it behave, etc., etc. And then everything sort of comes in motion, and then perhaps you will get some sort of idea about this thing you're thinking about, okay? Or maybe you don't. Maybe you need some time to revisit it, maybe multiple times. Maybe you need time to sleep. Again, see my video about sleep where I describe how sleep actually helps you in terms of thinking. Like just lying down actually helps because it changes the blood flow in your body. It changes your state of being, which leads me to the conclusion that thinking is not only the activity, but it's an activity that is heavily determined by your state of being. Well, that you're in during this activity, okay? So the state of being determines what kind of thinking you can do in this state of being. That's kind of what I mean. So great, like if revisiting the same thoughts, the same ideas, the same objects, perhaps after a brief amount of time helps, perfect. You get the idea, not in this sense, but you get the idea, you get some thoughts about this object, well, then everything is good. However, what if you don't? And what if you actually, things happen in such a way that you only revisit the same thing, let's say a year later, okay? So, obviously, in this situation, your state of being would have shifted significantly because you, a year later, is no longer the same you, if you know what I mean. So if you stop thinking for a while, unfortunately, it's become like it's lost. The thinking itself is lost. That previous thinking, at the very least, and all the results thereof, they're just completely forgotten already. So you can never go back to the same state because you is no longer you, and therefore your previous thinking is unachievable, accessible, I forgot the proper word. You cannot access it anymore, long story short. You only have your new thinking, if you know what I mean. So, yeah, you can't enter the same river twice, basically. Maybe you can enter the same river twice, but it's no longer you. This you and that you, maybe the river is the same. It's you cannot enter the same river twice because this is no longer you. Okay, so, yeah, you will change over time, basically. Of course, you might say, well, memory can help. Like, why don't we just say, well, we remember what we were thinking? Well, to some degree, yes, that is the case. But consider this, like, memory is a reconstruction inherently. So memory doesn't exist temporally, if you wish. Memory is always right now, actually. When you're remembering things, you're just reconstructing them, but it happens from your current state of being. You're reconstructing the past. So your memory tomorrow is not the same as your memory today, even about the same object, because your state tomorrow is not the same as your state today. And therefore you will reconstruct the past differently tomorrow. Of course, tomorrow might be like a bit of an overreach, but let's say it's easily noticeable when we're talking about years or decades, alright? The difference is noticeable. So something very specific cannot be reconstructed because you no longer have the materials, if you wish, right? The building blocks. How can you construct something? You need something to construct it of or from. The building raw materials. But if your raw materials are not the same anymore, how can you make the reconstruction? And it's not the same anymore in a literal sense, you know, that more than 90%, and that's a conservative estimate, of all the particles that make up your body change in 1 year. So a year later from now, like more than 90% of all of your body is not the same. It's the different bunch of particles. If we're talking about this in this naive reductionist kind of way of what you are. Okay, you're like a ship of Theseus, proverbial. So this you are no longer that you, who has had these thoughts previously. So you can't really remember what you were thinking, basically. That's my conclusion, fundamentally. So thinking is inherently a performance, a flow. It has a temporal component to it. It's dynamic. It's a process, like walking the tightrope. You can't really stop it. You can maybe briefly interrupt it, but then you have to continue, or else it would be gone. And again, obviously, walking the tightrope brings up some Nietzschean analogies, metaphors, right? So, yeah, or another analogy, imagine you're working in some extreme environment where it takes a lot of effort even to get there. Like you're in Antarctica or something, or in a very deep mine where it's very hot and very high pressure, it's very cramped, etc., etc. Only in this environment where it's hard to get, you can actually get some profound idea in a literal sense, like what profound means. It means deep, right? De profundis, from the depths, the famous saying, right? So if you strive to acquire some original thoughts, well, original thoughts come from original states of being. As I've said, like your state of being determines what kind of thinking you can have. You can manifest, I guess, would be one way to express it. So, yeah, if you want to have profound ideas, you have to put yourself in a profound state of being. So in a balanced, sort of idle, decent kind of state, you will only get idle, balanced, decent kind of thoughts, which are trivial and like everybody has them, right? But so having a thought or idea that has certain like intensity or radicalness or deepness to it, you have to again put yourself in an according state of being, basically. Imagine you're a miner or a hunter, right? The best diamonds are in the places of the highest pressure, highest temperature, very extreme environment. And the best game, right, the best prey is deep within the jungle, very inaccessible. Otherwise, other hunters would have got it already. Again, a Nietzschean quote, "Do you strive to acquire your knowledge as lion strives to acquire his food?" You know, it's kind of a rhetorical question, kind of a taunt, actually. So, yeah. Well, speaking of which, maybe, long pause, it's good, actually, if you stop, at least sometimes, if you stop your thinking process, because, again, profound ideas, they have a very nasty property that they can actually kill you. And I'm not joking here. So you may have a thought that will completely destroy you. You may have uncovered something which is very dangerous to walk with outside of these extreme environments where you found it. So if you can preserve it somehow on the surface, maybe it's actually bad for you. So, it is what it is. Sometimes it happens. So if you don't want to risk it, just don't think. Okay? So yeah. But if it doesn't kill you, then basically my point, the moral of the story is that you have to strive to finish your thinking before you've changed the state of being, right? Otherwise, you will never be able to get back to your thinking. Like the prey would be gone, the game, I mean, the diamond will get buried, like there would be some crustal displacement, and it will be forever gone. You won't be able to find it anymore. And that's actually the big tragedy of thinking, like how much ideas is lost forever, every second actually on this planet, just because the thinker stopped thinking. And the thinker doesn't know it yet, but they won't be able to come back anymore. So yeah, they will never be able to get back. This is the tragedy of thinking. So paradoxically, you know, people like put this contradiction of, like practical people who are like do stuff against, like theoretical sort of people, like artists or thinkers again, right? So people make this contradiction and they're saying like, well, practical people, they're more in a moment. They have this motto, carpe diem, like chase the day, or like be in the moment, etc. Just experience everything, blah, blah, blah. And then the thinkers who like are not in the moment, they're constantly somewhere out there, right? Well, paradoxically, my point is that actually it's the artists and thinkers who have to carpe diem much harder than the practical, adrenaline driven people. The artists and thinkers have to actually care about the present moment much more than the physical people, if you know what I mean. So this is the big contradiction. Yeah. And again, I have some personal anecdotes of this sort, like when I'm reading my diaries that I've written in like when I was like 17, so that would be like 17 years ago actually. There are some things which I can easily understand, but there are some ideas which are just completely foreign to me. Like I have no idea what I tried to say. And like it's formulated very carefully, like everything is written down, but I just don't understand. I don't feel it anymore. It was a different person writing this, right? So, and I didn't finish it. Like I didn't write an essay, like, big essay about this idea. So it's just maybe like a half a paragraph. A few sentences. So I just don't know what it means. So yeah, I just can't get back. And the same, Nietzsche had the same thing, like, he was writing aphorisms. So he was just walking around like in the forest near the lake or in the mountains and writing down these relatively brief aphorisms. And then he literally testified that it was the most horrible time of his life when he had to compile a bunch of different aphorisms into a single book. Because again, one of the problems he faced is that like, he didn't agree with his own thinking. Why? Well, because it was a different Nietzsche writing this aphorism than the one compiling the book. Quite literally different one. All right. So this is kind of what we're talking about here. And okay, if you got the idea that I was discussing here, you are now prepared to actually listen to my own aphorism, which is, again, I've written perhaps maybe 16 years ago, which goes like, from difficult ordeals, one learns only the simplest truths, only the most simple truths, which kind of means, right, that when you're in this deep mine under heavy pressure with high temperature, you're in a completely different state, right? You can only take so much with you to the surface. Like, not many things will survive on the surface from that extreme environment. So only the most simple truths can be recovered from this very specific, very special, very extreme state of being that you have been in while you were being in these difficult ordeals that I'm talking about, okay? Not only, there's also another reason, but I won't tell you about it. Think about it yourself. But you have to finish your thoughts, otherwise, when you revisit them 1 year later, they will be gone, and you will never be able to recover them. Thank you for watching. The eons are closing. If you wish to support me, please consider joining my Patreon. That is patreon.com/philosopher. See the link in the description. Or if you have a scientific theory of your own and you'd like my help in developing it, please join my alternative science coaching program, also available through Patreon.